The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Sophia Turner forward against the worn leather seat as dust billowed through the window, coating her already travel-stained dress in another layer of Texas grit. She pressed her gloved hand against the window frame and peered out at Terlingua, a collection of sun-bleached buildings scattered across the harsh landscape like discarded bones, and wondered if she had made the greatest mistake of her life. 3 weeks ago, she had been in Philadelphia, sitting in her tiny rented room above the bakery where she worked 16 hours a day for wages that barely kept her fed. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday, written in careful, measured handwriting that spoke of a ranch outside Terlingua, of wide open spaces, of a life that might offer something more than the grinding poverty that had consumed her existence since her parents died in the factory fire 2 years prior. Grant Harrison, the letter said, was 32 years old, owned a cattle ranch, and was seeking a wife who understood hard work and could appreciate the simple life the frontier offered. She had responded within a day, her own letter perhaps too honest about her circumstances, about the loneliness that had become her constant companion, about how she expected nothing from this arrangement except perhaps a roof over her head and honest labor to fill her days. She had not expected love. At 23, she had watched enough marriages of convenience to know they were business arrangements, nothing more. Love was for storybooks and wealthy people who had the luxury of choice. The driver opened the door, and Sophia stepped down onto the dusty Main Street, her legs unsteady after days of travel. The September heat hit her like a physical force, so different from the humid warmth of Philadelphia. This was a dry, relentless heat that seemed to pull moisture from her skin. "Miss Turner," a man's voice, deep and uncertain, came from her left. Sophia turned and felt her breath catch. Grant Harrison stood about 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered and lean in the way of men who did physical labor from sunrise to sunset. His face was tanned dark from the sun, with lines around his eyes that spoke of squinting into bright horizons. Those eyes were a startling green, almost luminous against his weathered skin. His brown hair curled slightly where it touched his collar, and he held his hat in his hands, turning it nervously between his fingers. He wore clean clothes, she noticed, a white shirt and dark trousers, boots that had been recently polished. He had made an effort. "Mr. Harrison," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. He nodded, those green eyes taking her in with an expression she could not quite read. "I hope the journey was not too difficult." "It was long," she admitted, "but I survived it." A ghost of a smile touched his lips. "Surviving is what we do best out here." He gestured toward a wagon hitched to 2 sturdy horses. "The ranch is about an hour's ride. We should go before it gets dark. The roads are not kind to travelers after sunset." He helped her into the wagon, his hand warm and calloused against hers even through her glove, then loaded her single trunk with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. As they left town, heading southwest into increasingly wild country, Sophia studied him from the corner of her eye. "Your letters did not mention how you came to ranching," she said finally, unable to bear the silence. Grant kept his eyes on the road, but she saw his jaw tighten slightly. "My father built the ranch. Started with nothing but determination and a piece of land that nobody else wanted. He died 4 years ago. Rattlesnake bite, I am sorry. It was quick at least." His voice was flat, controlled. "My mother died when I was 12, fever. After my father passed, it was just me and the ranch. 2,500 acres of hard ground, stubborn cattle, and more work than 10 men could handle. You have no help. I have 2 ranch hands, Miguel and his son Carlos. They live in the bunkhouse. Good men, hard workers, but the house itself has been empty except for me." He glanced at her then, and she saw something raw in his expression. "I am not good at pretty words, Miss Turner. I work from before dawn until after dark most days. The house is clean but simple. The life is hard. But I promise you will never go hungry, and I will never raise my hand to you. That is the best I can offer." His honesty was like cold water, bracing and somehow reassuring. "I do not need pretty words, Mr. Harrison. I need exactly what you have described." Something in his shoulders relaxed. "Grant. You should call me Grant. Then you should call me Sophia." The ranch appeared as they crested a rise, and Sophia felt her breath catch again, but for a different reason. The house was larger than she had expected, a solid two-story structure built of pale stone and dark wood, with a wide porch that wrapped around the front and side. It sat in a small valley with a creek running behind it, cottonwood trees providing shade. Beyond the house, she could see the barn, corrals, and other outbuildings. Mountains rose in the distance, purple and imposing against the darkening sky. "It is beautiful," she said, and meant it. Grant pulled the wagon to a stop in front of the house, and for a moment he just sat there, looking at the place as if seeing it through her eyes. "I always thought so. Even when it was killing me with work, I thought it was the most beautiful place I had ever seen." He helped her down, then carried her trunk up to the porch. The door was unlocked. Inside, the house was indeed simple but clean. The main room held a large fireplace, comfortable furniture that showed signs of careful maintenance, and windows that let in the last of the day's light. A kitchen area occupied one end of the room with a cast-iron stove and a sturdy table. Everything was neat, organized, and somehow lonely despite its solidity. "Your room is upstairs," Grant said, carrying her trunk toward the stairs. "The room at the end of the hall. It has a good view of the sunrise." She followed him up, noting 3 other doors along the hallway. He set her trunk down in a spacious bedroom that held a large bed, a dresser, and a washstand. The window indeed faced east, and she could imagine how the light would flood in each morning. "My room is the one at the other end of the hall," he said, not quite meeting her eyes. "I want you to know that I do not expect anything from you beyond what you are willing to give. We can marry for the legal protections it offers, but the rest can happen in its own time. Or not at all. I will leave that to you." Sophia turned to look at him fully. In the fading light, his face was half in shadow, but she could see the sincerity there, the bone-deep loneliness that matched her own. This was a man who had been alone too long, who had forgotten what it was to have someone to talk to at the end of a long day. "That is kind of you," she said softly. He nodded, backing toward the door. "I will be up before dawn. The work starts early. But you should rest tomorrow, get your bearings. I will show you around in the evening when I come back. I am not afraid of work." "I know." He paused in the doorway. "Your letters told me that much, but take a day anyway. The ranch will still be here." After he left, Sophia unpacked her few belongings, washed her face in the basin, and changed into her nightgown. Through the window, she could see the last light fading from the sky, stars beginning to emerge in numbers she had never witnessed in the city. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant sound of cattle and the whisper of wind through the cottonwood trees. She had come here expecting loneliness of a different sort, the isolation of being a stranger in a strange place. But lying in the comfortable bed, in this room that Grant had clearly prepared with care, she felt something she had not experienced in years, the possibility of belonging. The next morning, she woke to the sound of voices outside, men speaking in Spanish as they moved about their work. The sun was already well above the horizon, and she realized with a start that she had slept later than she had in years. She dressed quickly in one of her practical work dresses and went downstairs to find the kitchen empty, but coffee still warm on the stove. A note lay on the table in that same careful handwriting. "Help yourself to anything. There is bread in the box and preserves in the pantry. Back by evening." Sophia drank her coffee standing at the window, watching the ranch come to life in the morning light. She could see two men working in the corrals with horses, their movements efficient and practiced. Further out, she glimpsed Grant on horseback, moving among cattle in a far pasture. Even at this distance, she could identify him by the way he sat his horse, the confident line of his shoulders. She spent the day exploring the house, learning its rhythms and spaces. The pantry was well stocked, the root cellar cool and organized. Someone had been maintaining the household, and she guessed it was Grant himself, adding that labor to everything else he did. She found mending that needed doing, clothes that required proper washing, windows that could use a woman's touch. By evening, she had cleaned the kitchen thoroughly, baked fresh bread from the supplies she found, and started a stew with vegetables from the garden she discovered behind the house. When Grant came through the door as the sun was setting, the house smelled of food and effort, and he stopped in his tracks, his eyes going wide. "You did not have to do all this," he said, but his voice held wonder rather than complaint. "I needed to do something. I am not accustomed to idleness." She ladled stew into bowls and set them on the table. "Sit. You must be exhausted." He washed at the basin first, scrubbing the day's dirt from his hands and face, then sat across from her at the table. For a moment they ate in silence, and Sophia watched him relax by degrees, the tension leaving his shoulders, his eyes losing some of their guardedness. "This is the best meal I have had in 4 years," he said finally. "Surely not." "Surely yes." He met her eyes. "I can cook enough to stay alive, but I never had the time or the skill to make food taste like this, like someone cared about it." The simple honesty of the statement made her throat tight. "Then I am glad I could provide it." After dinner, as promised, he showed her around the ranch. He introduced her to Miguel, a man in his 50s with kind eyes and a ready smile, and Carlos, his son, who was perhaps 25 and obviously curious about the new woman on the ranch. They both treated her with careful respect, welcoming her in accented English before switching to rapid Spanish between themselves. Grant showed her the barn, the chicken coop she had not noticed before, the smokehouse, the spring house. He explained the rhythms of ranch life, the seasonal demands, the constant challenges of weather and predators, and the sheer stubbornness of cattle. "It sounds overwhelming," Sophia admitted as they walked back toward the house in the gathering darkness. "It is," he agreed. "But it is also the only life I know, the only one I want." He stopped, turning to face her. "I know this is not what you might have hoped for. If you had stayed in Philadelphia, you might have found someone who could offer you an easier life, maybe even love that came naturally instead of this awkward arrangement." "In Philadelphia, I was slowly disappearing," Sophia said, surprised by her own vehemence. "Every day was exactly like the one before. I woke up tired, worked until I could barely stand, and went to bed knowing nothing would ever change. At least here, there is space to breathe, room to become something more than I was." He studied her face in the dim light. "I am glad you see it that way." The first week passed in a blur of learning and adjustment. Sophia rose early, determined to master the rhythms of ranch life. She learned to tend the chickens, to make butter and cheese, to manage the enormous task of cooking for hungry men who worked physical jobs. Grant came in 3 times a day for meals, and each time she saw him relax a little more, saw the deep lines around his eyes soften. They talked during these meals, at first just practical matters about the ranch, but gradually more personal topics emerged. She learned that he had taught himself to read from his mother's Bible, that he loved the sunrise over the mountains more than any other sight. that he had once thought about leaving the ranch, but could not bring himself to abandon what his father had built. He learned that she had wanted to be a teacher before her parents died, that she missed autumn leaves more than anything else about the East, that she had a sharp mind for numbers and could calculate feed costs and cattle prices in her head faster than he could with paper and pencil. On Sunday, they rode into town together for church. The small congregation welcomed her with cautious curiosity, the women especially eager to include her in their conversations after the service. Sophia realized that she was something of a novelty, the mail-order bride who had come to the Harrison ranch. They wanted to assess whether she would survive, whether she was suitable, whether Grant had chosen well. She held her head high and answered their questions with polite firmness, and she saw Grant watching her with something like pride in his eyes. On the way home, he said, "You handled them well. Martha Evans in particular can be sharp-tongued. I worked in a bakery, remember. I dealt with demanding customers every day. Church ladies do not frighten me." He laughed, a real laugh that transformed his face, and Sophia felt warmth bloom in her chest. She was learning to read his expressions, to understand the subtle shifts in his mood. She was learning him, and the knowledge felt precious. 2 weeks after her arrival, Grant came to breakfast looking troubled. Sophia set eggs and bacon in front of him and waited, knowing by now that he would speak when he was ready. "There is a cattle auction in Marfa next week," he said finally. "I need to sell some of the yearlings and buy supplies for winter. It will take 3 days, maybe 4 with travel. That sounds necessary. I do not like leaving you here alone. Miguel and Carlos will be here, but still." Sophia sat down across from him. "I will be fine. I am more capable than I look. I know you are." He pushed his eggs around his plate. "But that is not the only thing troubling me." She waited. "We have been married by common law since you have been living here 2 weeks in the eyes of the state if not the church," he said, his voice careful. "But we have not discussed making it official. I thought before I leave we might go to the minister, if you are willing." Her heart began to beat faster. "Why now?" He finally looked up, meeting her eyes directly. "Because every day you are here, I am more certain that having you leave would break something in me. Because you have brought life back to this house, to this ranch. Because when I ride in at the end of the day and see the lights on in the windows, I feel something I have not felt since before my mother died. Like I am coming home instead of just returning to a place where I sleep." The raw honesty of it stole her breath. "Grant, I am not asking you to love me," he continued quickly. "I know that is not part of our arrangement, but I am asking you to stay, permanently, as my wife in every legal sense." Sophia reached across the table and took his hand, feeling the calluses, the warmth, the slight tremor that revealed his nervousness. "I will marry you. Today, if the minister is available." Relief washed over his features. "Today, then." They rode to town that afternoon and found Reverend Coleman in his small house beside the church. He performed the ceremony with Miguel and Carlos as witnesses, the 4 men watching as Sophia repeated the vows that bound her life to Grant's. When the Reverend pronounced them married, Grant kissed her carefully, a brief press of lips that held more question than demand. That night, Sophia stood in her room still and not their room, listening to the house settle around her. She had not expected the marriage to change anything immediately, but she found herself thinking about the careful kiss, about the way Grant's hand had trembled slightly when he placed the simple gold band on her finger. She heard a soft knock at her door. "Come in," she called, and Grant entered, still dressed but barefoot, his hair damp from washing. "I wanted to say good night," he said, hovering near the door, "and to thank you again for agreeing to marry me." "You do not need to thank me. This arrangement benefits us both." He nodded but did not leave. "Sophia, I want you to know that even though we are married now, nothing has to change. You can keep this room as long as you want. I meant what I said about letting things develop naturally." She rose from where she sat on the bed and crossed to him. In the lamplight, his eyes were very green, very uncertain. She reached up and touched his face, feeling the roughness of his evening stubble beneath her palm. "You are a good man, Grant Harrison," she said softly. "Better than I expected to find in this world." He turned his face into her palm, his eyes closing briefly. "I am just a man trying to do right by someone who took a chance on him. Then do right by both of us and stop hovering in doorways." She took his hand. "Stay, talk to me until I am sleepy. Tell me about the cattle auction, about what you hope to accomplish." They sat together on the bed, backs against the headboard, and Grant talked. His voice was low and soothing, and Sophia found herself leaning against his shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rhythm of his breathing. She could not remember the last time she had felt this safe, this comfortable in another person's presence. When she woke in the morning, she was tucked under the covers, still in her dressing gown, and Grant was gone. A note on the pillow said, "You fell asleep. I did not want to wake you." The days before Grant left for Marfa passed quickly. Sophia threw herself into preparing the ranch for his absence, making sure there was plenty of food ready, that everything was organized and in order. Grant spent extra time showing her things he had not covered before, including how to handle the rifle he insisted she keep in the house. "I do not expect trouble," he said, demonstrating how to load and aim, "but I would feel better knowing you can defend yourself if needed." On the morning of his departure, she rose before dawn to make him breakfast. They ate in comfortable silence as the sky lightened outside the windows. "I will be back as soon as I can," he said, lingering by the door. "I know. Be safe." He crossed to her then, pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly deeply in a way that made her toes curl in her boots. When he pulled back, his eyes were bright with something fierce and tender. "I will miss you," he said, the words seeming to surprise him. "I will miss you too," she replied, and realized with a start that it was absolutely true. After he rode away, the ranch seemed larger, emptier. Sophia filled the hours with work, with organizing and cleaning and all the tasks she could find to occupy her hands and mind. Miguel and Carlos checked on her regularly, their presence reassuring even though they respected her space. On the second night, she was washing dishes when she heard horses approaching fast. It was too early for Grant to be back, and the urgency of the hoofbeats made her nervous. She dried her hands and picked up the rifle, checking that it was loaded as Grant had taught her. The knock on the door was sharp, imperative. "Miss Harrison," a man's voice called. "It is Deputy Wilson from Terlingua. I need to speak with you." She opened the door cautiously, rifle held carefully but not quite pointed at the man on her porch. He was young, perhaps 25, with a badge pinned to his vest and worry in his eyes. "What is wrong?" she asked, her heart beginning to pound. "It is your husband, madam. There was trouble in Marfa, a dispute over some cattle. Grant was shot." The world tilted sickeningly. "Is he alive?" "Yes, madam. He is at the doctor's office in Marfa. The doctor says he will likely recover, but it is serious. I thought you would want to know." Sophia did not hesitate. "I need to get there, tonight." "Madam, it is a hard ride and in the dark." "Then we should leave immediately so we can cover as much ground as possible." She was already moving, calling for Miguel, throwing supplies together with shaking hands. Within an hour, she was on horseback beside the deputy, Miguel having insisted on accompanying them. They rode through the night, changing horses at a relay station, pushing hard. Sophia had never ridden so far or so fast, but fear drove her onward. The man she had married, the man who had shown her such careful kindness, was hurt and alone, and she would not let him face that without her. They reached Marfa as the sun was rising. The doctor's office was a small building near the center of town, and Sophia dismounted before her horse had fully stopped, rushing to the door. Inside, a gray-haired man in wire-rimmed spectacles looked up from washing his hands in a basin. "You must be Mrs. Harrison. Your husband has been asking for you." "How bad is it?" The bullet went through his side below the ribs, missed anything vital by about 2 inches. "He has lost blood and will need time to heal, but he should recover fully if infection does not set in." Relief made her knees weak. "Can I see him?" The doctor led her to a small back room where Grant lay on a narrow bed, his torso wrapped in bandages, his face pale but alert. His eyes found hers immediately, and something in his expression cracked open. "Sophia," he breathed, "you came." She went to his side, taking his hand carefully, afraid of hurting him. "Of course I came. Did you think I would not? It is a hard journey, dangerous in the dark." "I did not care." She touched his face gently, feeling the fever heat of his skin. "What happened?" He closed his eyes briefly. "A man claimed I was trying to sell him cattle that belonged to his neighbor. It was a lie, but he was drunk and angry. He drew on me. I was faster, but his friend got a shot off before I could turn." "Did you kill him?" "No, neither of them. I just wounded the one who drew first. The sheriff has them both in custody now." He looked at her intently. "I am sorry. I promised you a stable life, and here I am bleeding in a doctor's office within a month of our marriage." "You promised me honest work and a roof over my head," she corrected. "You said nothing about never getting hurt. This is not your fault." His hand tightened on hers. "I was so angry when it happened. Not about being shot, but about the idea that I might die before I could get back to you. That you would think I had abandoned you like so many other promises in your life had been broken." Tears stung her eyes. "Grant." "I love you," he said, the words tumbling out rough and unpolished. "I did not mean to. I know it was not part of our arrangement. But somewhere between your first breakfast and your laugh when the chickens got loose and the way you stood up to the church ladies, I fell completely in love with you. If I had died, I wanted you to know that. I wanted someone to tell you." Sophia leaned down, careful of his injury, and kissed him softly. "Then it is good you did not die, because I would have been furious with you for leaving before I could tell you the same thing." His eyes widened. "You love me, desperately, completely. In a way I did not think was possible when I got off that stagecoach expecting loneliness and found you instead." She smiled through her tears. "You have filled every empty space in my heart, Grant Harrison. All the hollow places I thought would be empty forever." He pulled her down despite the obvious pain it caused him, kissing her with all the pent-up emotion of a lonely man who had finally found his home. When they broke apart, he was smiling despite the lines of pain around his eyes. "Marry me again," he said. "We are already married." "I know. But marry me again when I am healed. A real wedding with all the trimmings, with you in a proper dress and the whole town watching. I want everyone to know that you chose me, that we chose each other, not out of convenience but out of love." "That seems excessive." "Probably. But I am injured and you have to be nice to me." She laughed, the sound bright and free in the small room. "Very well. When you are healed, we will have another wedding. The most excessive, romantic wedding Terlingua has ever seen." The journey back to the ranch took 4 days because they had to go slowly for Grant's sake. Sophia drove the wagon while Grant lay in the back, propped up on blankets and grumbling about being treated like cargo. Miguel drove the cattle Grant had purchased ahead of them, with Carlos bringing up the rear on horseback. Despite his injury, Grant was in good spirits, talking and joking more than Sophia had ever heard him. It was as if the confession of love had released something in him, some tightly held control that he no longer needed to maintain. "What are you thinking about?" he asked during one of their rest stops, watching her face in the afternoon light. "About how different my life is from what I imagined a month ago," she admitted. "I expected to be tolerated at best, a useful addition to your household but never truly welcome. Instead, I have found something I did not even know I was looking for." "What is that?" "Home, partnership, love." She turned to him. "Everything I thought was lost to me after my parents died." He reached for her hand, threading their fingers together. "I know what you mean. After my father passed, I convinced myself that I was meant to live alone. That the ranch was enough, that hard work could fill all the empty hours. But it could not. Nothing could until you arrived. The ranch had never looked so welcoming as when they finally crested the rise and saw it spread out in the valley below. Miguel had ridden ahead to let the household know they were coming, and smoke rose from the chimney, a promise of warmth and comfort. Getting Grant into the house and up to his room took careful maneuvering, but finally, he was settled in his own bed with Sophia fussing over him despite his protests. "I can take care of myself," he insisted. "You are injured and will do as you are told." She brought him broth and fresh bread, made him drink water, checked his bandages with the careful attention the doctor had taught her. That night she slept in a chair beside his bed, unwilling to be further away than arm's reach. She woke to find him watching her in the lamplight, his expression soft with wonder. "This is going to be difficult," he said. "What is?" "Recovering quickly when having you hover over me is so pleasant." She threw a pillow at him, careful to aim for his head and not his injury, and he laughed, the sound rich and warm in the quiet room. The weeks of his recovery were a strange, sweet time. Grant chafed at his confinement, but submitted to her care with good grace most days. They talked for hours, learning each other's stories with new depth now that love had been spoken aloud between them. He told her about his childhood, about learning to ride before he could walk, about the hard lessons his father had taught him about the land and the animals, and about being a man of honor. She told him about her parents, about the dreams she had harbored as a girl, about the terror and desperation of those first months after they died, about the grinding poverty that had slowly worn away her hope until his letter had arrived like an answer to prayers. She had been too tired to speak. "I almost did not write back," he admitted one afternoon as she changed his bandages. "I had tried once before, 5 years ago, sent letters to 3 different women. 2 never responded. The third came out but took one look at the ranch, at how hard the life would be, and got back on the stage coach the same day. That must have hurt. It did. It made me feel like I was not enough, like the life I had built was not worth staying for. So when I finally worked up the courage to try again, I almost could not do it. But something made me write that letter to you, made me take the chance one more time." Sophia leaned down and kissed him gently. "I am so glad you did. I am glad some woman was foolish enough to reject you, because it meant you were still available when I needed you most." By late October, Grant was healing well enough to move around, though Sophia still limited his activities. The first time he made it downstairs for breakfast, sitting at the table in his usual spot, they both felt the rightness of it, the return to their comfortable patterns with the added sweetness of declared love between them. "I want to show you something," he said after they finished eating. "If you will help me to the barn." Curious, she assisted him outside and into the large barn. In one of the stalls stood a beautiful sorrel mare with a white blaze, her eyes bright and intelligent. "I bought her at the auction," Grant said, "before I was shot. I was planning to surprise you with her when I got home. Grant, she is beautiful. She is yours. I know the wagon is practical, but I thought you might like to ride sometimes to see the ranch the way I see it, to have that freedom." Sophia turned to him, throat tight with emotion. "You bought her before you told me you loved me." "I loved you before I told you," he corrected. "I think I started loving you during that wagon ride from town, when you said you did not need pretty words, just honesty. Every day after that just made it deeper." She kissed him there in the barn, surrounded by the smell of hay and horses, and felt the truth of belonging settle into her bones. This was her life now, this man and this place, and she would fight for it with everything she had. The second wedding took place in mid-November on a crisp, clear day. Sophia wore a new dress of deep blue silk that the women of the town had helped her make, declaring that a proper wedding required proper attire. Grant wore a new suit, his hair freshly cut, standing at the altar of the small church with his eyes never leaving her face as she walked down the aisle. The whole town had turned out, filling the pews and spilling out the doors. When Reverend Coleman asked if they took each other to have and to hold, their voices rang out strong and certain, and the kiss they shared was not careful or questioning but full of promise and passion. The celebration afterward was held at the ranch, with long tables set up in the yard, food prepared by every woman in the county, and music played on fiddles and guitars. Grant danced with Sophia as the sun set, holding her close despite his still healing injury, and she saw in his eyes everything she had come west hoping to find. "Happy," he murmured against her ear, "completely. No regrets about the mail-order bride arrangement. Only that we wasted the first 2 weeks being so careful around each other when we could have been doing this." She kissed him in front of everyone, and the crowd cheered and whistled. That night, when they finally closed the door on their room now shared, Grant took her face in his hands and looked at her with such intensity that she felt it like a physical touch. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you never regret choosing me," he said. "I will spend mine making sure you know you were always enough," she replied. "More than enough. Everything." Their joining was tender and passionate, a discovery of each other that felt both inevitable and miraculous. Afterward, lying tangled together in the big bed with moonlight streaming through the window, Sophia felt the last pieces of her heart settle into place. The empty spaces that had echoed with loneliness were filled with his presence, his love, the life they were building together. Winter came to the ranch with cold winds and occasional snow. Sophia learned to manage the household through the harsher weather, to keep the fires going, to make the stored food last. Grant worked shorter days, coming in earlier when the sun set before 5 in the evening, and they spent the long nights by the fire, talking and planning for the future. "I want to expand the herd next year," he said one evening, studying the books she had taken over managing. "Your head for numbers has shown me we can afford it. We could also add chickens, maybe some pigs, diversify what we produce." He looked at her with such pride that it made her blush. "You think like a true rancher." "I think like your partner," she corrected. "This is our ranch, our future. I have as much stake in its success as you do." He pulled her into his lap, kissing her soundly. "Have I told you today that I love you? Not in the last hour. A grave oversight. I love you, Sophia Harrison. You are the best thing that ever happened to me. Even better than inheriting the ranch. The ranch is just land and animals. You are life itself." Christmas came, and they exchanged simple gifts. She gave him a new shirt she had sewn, embroidered with his initials. He gave her books, 3 precious volumes ordered from San Antonio, because he remembered her mentioning that she had once dreamed of being a teacher. "So you can teach our children someday," he said, and she felt her breath catch at the casual mention of children, of a future populated with more than just the 2 of them. In February, she confirmed what she had suspected for several weeks. She told him over breakfast, simply and directly, watching his face transform with wonder. "A baby," he repeated, as if he could not quite believe it. "Due in late summer, the doctor thinks." He came around the table and pulled her to her feet, holding her carefully as if she had suddenly become made of glass. "We are having a baby. We are having a baby," she confirmed, laughing at his dazed expression. He kissed her, then knelt and pressed his forehead against her still flat stomach. "Hello, little one. I am your father, and I promise you I will do everything in my power to give you a good life." Tears spilled down Sophia's cheeks as she ran her fingers through his hair. A year ago, she had been alone and desperate in Philadelphia, convinced her life would never hold more than drudgery and loneliness. Now she stood in a house filled with love, carrying the child of a man who treated her like she hung the moon and stars. The pregnancy was not easy. The summer heat was oppressive, and Sophia struggled with nausea and fatigue. But Grant was endlessly patient, adjusting his work schedule to check on her frequently, bringing her cold water from the spring, sitting with her in the evening and reading aloud from the books he had given her at Christmas. In August, on a sweltering afternoon when the heat seemed to press down on the ranch like a physical weight, Sophia went into labor. Grant sent Carlos racing for the doctor and the midwife while he stayed by her side, holding her hand through the contractions, his face etched with worry. "I am fine," she kept telling him between pains. "Women do this all the time." "Not my woman," he said fiercely. "If anything happens to you, nothing will happen to me. I am too stubborn to die now after everything we have built." The labor lasted through the night and into the next day. When their son finally arrived just as the sun was setting, his loud cries filling the room, Grant wept openly, his shoulders shaking with relief and joy. "A boy," the midwife said, placing the baby in Sophia's arms. "Healthy and strong." Sophia looked down at her son, at his red face and dark hair, and felt her heart expand in ways she had not known were possible. When she looked up, Grant was watching them both with such naked adoration that it stole her breath. "He is perfect," Grant whispered, reaching out to touch one tiny fist. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking James, after my father, if you approve." "James Harrison," she tried out the name. "It suits him." Grant climbed carefully onto the bed beside her, wrapping his arm around her shoulders so they could both look at their son together. "Thank you," he said softly, "for coming here, for taking a chance on me, for giving me this family I never thought I would have." "Thank you for filling every empty space in my heart," she replied, leaning her head on his shoulder, "for making me whole again." The years passed in a blur of hard work and deep contentment. James grew into a sturdy boy with his father's green eyes and his mother's quick mind. When he was 3, Sophia gave birth to a daughter they named Ruth, whose arrival brought even more joy to the already happy household. 2 years later, another son, Daniel, completed their family. The ranch prospered under their joint management. Sophia's organizational skills and head for numbers combined with Grant's knowledge of ranching and his willingness to innovate made them one of the most successful operations in the region. They added the chickens and pigs she had suggested, and Sophia began selling eggs and smoked meat in town, adding to their income. The house expanded too, with Grant adding another room as the children grew and a larger kitchen to accommodate their growing family. The loneliness that had once permeated every corner was banished completely, replaced by the chaos and joy of children's laughter, of family dinners around the big table, of a life lived fully and richly. On their 10th anniversary, Grant took Sophia riding up into the hills behind the ranch to a spot that overlooked the entire spread. They sat together on a flat rock, watching the sun set over land they had worked together to build into something lasting. "You ever regret it?" He asked, the same question he had asked on their second wedding day. "Not for a single moment," she replied, and it was true. "Do you? My only regret is that I wasted so many years alone before I worked up the courage to write that letter." He pulled her close. "But maybe I needed those years to appreciate what I have now, to understand how precious this is." "We have built a good life," she said, looking out at the ranch at the house where lights were beginning to glow in the windows as Miguel's daughter Maria, who helped with the children now, lit the lamps. "We have built everything," Grant corrected. "A home, a family, a legacy. When I look at our children, when I see how James is already learning the ranch, how Ruth organizes her brothers like she is preparing to run a company, how Daniel follows Miguel around learning Spanish and animal husbandry, I see the future continuing long after we are gone." "Getting philosophical in your old age," she teased. "I am only 42, hardly old." "Ancient," she said, laughing when he tickled her in retaliation. They rode back to the house as the stars emerged, and Sophia felt the same sense of rightness she had felt that first night in the wagon with Grant, when she had glimpsed the ranch and thought it beautiful. She had been right. This place was beautiful, not because of the land or the buildings, but because of what it represented. The possibility of starting over, of finding love in unexpected places, of building something meaningful from nothing. The children met them at the door, full of stories about their day, demanding attention and affection. Grant scooped up Daniel while James helped Sophia dismount, already the gentleman his father was teaching him to be. Ruth clutched Sophia's hand, chattering about a bird's nest she had found. Inside, the house was warm and bright, filled with the smells of dinner and the sounds of family. They gathered around the table, all of them together, and Grant said grace with his hand clasped in Sophia's, thanking God for the blessings they had received. After the children were in bed, Sophia and Grant sat together on the porch as they did most evenings, watching the darkness settle over the ranch. His arm was around her shoulders, her head resting against his chest, listening to the steady beat of his heart. "I love you," he said, the words as natural as breathing after 10 years of saying them. "I love you too," she replied, the response just as natural, just as true. She thought about the frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach in Terlingua, expecting nothing more than survival, and marveled at how wrong she had been about what waited for her. She had not found loneliness in the Wild West. She had found Grant, who had filled every empty space in her heart completely, who had given her a life richer and more fulfilling than any dream she had ever dared to have. The ranch stretched out around them in the darkness, peaceful and prosperous. In the distance, cattle lowed softly. Somewhere an owl called. The wind whispered through the cottonwood trees. And inside the house, their children slept safely, the future they represented bright with possibility. This was home. This was love. This was everything she had never known she needed, delivered through a mail-order bride arrangement that had become the greatest gift of her life. She had come west expecting to simply exist, to fill her days with work and her nights with quiet loneliness. Instead, she had found a partner who saw her as an equal, a love that grew deeper with each passing year, and a family that gave meaning to every moment. Grant turned his head and kissed her temple, a gesture of affection worn smooth by repetition, but no less meaningful for its familiarity. She tilted her face up to his, and they kissed in the darkness, a promise renewed without words. The stars wheeled overhead, eternal and unchanging, while below them the life they had built together continued, rich with love and laughter, with hard work and deep satisfaction, with all the messy, beautiful complexity of a full and happy existence. Sophia had come to Texas as a stranger, desperate and alone. She had found Grant Harrison, equally alone, equally desperate in his own way. Together, they had filled the empty spaces in each other's hearts, had built something lasting and true. They had created not just a home or a ranch or a family, but a love story for the ages, written in the Wild West dust, and sealed with the kind of devotion that only comes from two people who understand what it means to be truly seen and valued. Years later, when their grandchildren would ask about how they met, Sophia would tell them the truth, that she had answered an advertisement expecting nothing but survival, and had found instead a love that filled every corner of her existence. She would tell them about the long stagecoach ride, about the first time she saw the ranch and thought it beautiful, about how their grandfather had been nervous and kind, and had promised her nothing but honesty. And Grant would add his part, about how he had almost not sent that letter, about how scared he had been that she would take one look at his rough life and leave, about how she had instead rolled up her sleeves and made herself indispensable not just to the ranch, but to his very heart. But those stories were for the future. On this night, their 10th anniversary, they simply sat together in the peaceful darkness, two people who had found each other against the odds and had built a life that exceeded all expectations. The loneliness they had both carried for so long was gone, replaced by the deep contentment of being exactly where they belonged, with exactly who they belonged with. The ranch would continue. The children would grow. The years would pass. But the foundation they had built together, the love that had grown from a business arrangement into something profound and unshakable, would endure. It was a love story born of the Wild West, tempered by hardship, and strengthened by the simple choice they made every day to choose each other, to fill each other's empty spaces, to be each other's home. And as they sat there on the porch under the vast Texas sky, Sophia thought about that frightened woman on the stagecoach and wished she could tell her that everything would be all right, that the loneliness would end, that the rancher waiting in Terlingua would become her whole world and she would become his, that together they would build something beautiful and lasting. But she did not need to tell her, because that woman had found out for herself. She had taken the risk, made the journey, and found on the other side not just survival but genuine happiness. She had found love in its truest form with a man who treated her like a treasure, who valued her mind and her partnership as much as her heart. The night deepened around them, but they stayed on the porch, reluctant to end this perfect moment. Inside, their children dreamed of tomorrow. Around them, the ranch settled into its nighttime rhythms. And between them, the love they shared burned bright and steady, a light that would never dim, a warmth that would never fade. This was what she had traveled so far to find. This was what had been waiting for her in the Wild West, in the letters of a lonely rancher who had needed her as much as she had needed him. This was home and love and everything worth having in the world, all wrapped up in one perfect, imperfect, beautiful life together.